Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard here, welcome back to the channel. Just a little while ago, I reviewed the TTArtisan 28mm f5.6 lens for the Leica M11. That is a very compact lens that is great for street photography, and I have to say that is one of the most beautiful lenses that I have ever used. So today we have another M11 lens from TTArtisan again, and it is this 35mm f2 APO lens. So I thought we can start the review by go out and take some photo using this lens with the Leica M11, and then we can come back, have a look at the photos, and also do my usual image quality test as well. Okay guys, now we are back to my studio. I hope you like some of the photos. So now let's have a look at the design of the lens, and then we'll have a look at the image quality test results as well. This TTArtisan 35mm f2 APO lens is a full frame lens that is designed for the Leica M11 rangefinder cameras, but you could use it on pretty much any mirrorless cameras in the market with a simple adapter. So you can use it on full frame or APS-C or micro four thirds mirrorless cameras, and that's great if you are someone like me that shoot with multiple cameras from different brands. You just need to buy a couple of those cheap adapters, and then you can use this same lens on any of your mirrorless camera. One thing I want to mention first is the size and the weight of this lens. For a M11 lens, this TTArtisan 35mm f2 lens is not a small lens at all. The weight of this lens is about 510 grams, so it is also pretty heavy. Actually, I was quite surprised when I found out this 35mm f2 lens is bigger and heavier than TTArtisan's own M11 35mm f1.4 lens. I'm guessing part of the reason is that the lens has a pretty complex optics design. 12 elements in 9 groups, including 3 ED elements and 1 aspherical element. Look at the MTF chart of this lens. It seems to be a big improvement compared to the 35mm f1.4 lens, but we'll have a look at the image quality in a minute. Because of the size of the lens, when you look through the rangefinder on a Leica M camera, the lens would block quite a bit of the frame, even though the lens hood already has a cutout at the corner. Now of course, if you use it on other mirrorless cameras with an adapter, then this wouldn't be an issue at all. This lens has a really solid metal construction. It's so solid that I feel like someone can just use it as a weapon, as the body of this lens is a really heavy, solid piece of metal. This is a fully mechanical lens with no electronic components, but it does have the rangefinder coupling, and the lens also comes with a test chart and a little tool for you to fine-tune the focus if you want. I didn't do that myself, as I found my sample seems to have pretty accurate focus out of the box already. Even the infinity hard stop seems to be spot on at infinity. The length of the lens would increase when you change the focus to close distance, but the change is quite small. The focus ring feels a little bit tight, but it is very smooth. There is also a focus tab for you to turn the focus ring using just one finger. The travel flow of the focus ring is about 110 degrees or so, and we have the aperture ring at the front, and it has some really satisfying clicks and it is 2 clicks per stop from the maximum aperture f2 all the way to f22. The metal lens hood is removable, and there is a front soft lens cap that you can clip onto the lens hood. So overall, in terms of the overall build quality and design, this TTArtisan lens is really pretty good for a M1 lens that costs less than $500. Okay, we will look at the image quality now. So apart from the lens flare and the focus briefing test, all the other image quality tests were shot using the Leica M11, which has the super high resolution 60 megapixel full frame sensor. And as usual, we'll start with the image sharpness first. Look at the center of the photo. At the maximum aperture f2, the center is already very sharp even when we zoom in and check the photo at 200% zoom. Stopping down the lens from f2 to f4 doesn't really increase the sharpness because it was pretty much as sharp as you could get at f2 already. Due to diffraction, once you stop down the lens to f11 and then center sharpness will start to drop quite noticeably. And we'll have a look at the corner sharpness now. At f2, the corner is slightly soft, and at f2.8, the corner sharpness improves slightly. At f4, the corner becomes pretty good, and at f5.6, the corner sharpness is excellent. The corner sharpness remains excellent until we reach f11. Once again, diffraction will start to make the corner softer if we stop down the lens further. And just a reminder again, we are looking at the 60 megapixel photos from the Leica M11, so it is really demanding in terms of sharpness, and this TTArtisan lens does pretty well. The minimum focus distance of this TTArtisan lens is 70 cm, which is the standard minimum focus distance for M1 lenses. It is not really that close for a 35mm focal length lens. I do not know the maximum magnification ratio, but judging by just looking at my usual Lego minifigure photo that's shot at the minimum focus distance, it is probably around 0.1 or slightly lower than that. But while the maximum magnification ratio is not very high, the sharpness when you are taking photo at the minimum focus distance is pretty decent. Even when shooting at f2, the center is already very sharp, so you don't really need to stop down the lens unless you need more depth of field. A 35mm f2 lens is probably not a lens for creating creamy, melted background, but it is still possible to dissolve the background a bit when your subject is close to you to create a bit of foreground-background separation. The bokeh from this lens is quite present, but if you zoom in and you would sometimes see some onion pattern in the bokeh balls, also a bit of highlight near the edge of the bokeh balls as well. It is not very obvious when I'm looking at the photo even at full screen, but when I zoom in and do some pixel peeping, then I would notice that. And next, let's have a look at the vignetting performance. At the maximum aperture f2, there is already not too much vignetting. Even with this plain wall photo, you don't really see much vignetting at all. The vignetting is also quite gradual as well. As I stop down the lens, vignetting would become less and less. At f4, the amount of vignetting is already very minimal. So overall, vignetting is really well controlled with this TTArtisan 35mm f2 lens. Maybe this is one of the reasons why this lens is a little bit larger than average. TTArtisan call this 35mm f2 lens an APO lens, which means they believe the lens has very minimal amount of chromatic aberration. So let's have a look and see if it's true or not. Here are a few high contrast photos that I shot at f2, the maximum aperture. If we zoom in and look at the photo at 200% zoom, there is only very minimal hint of color fringing, and I really mean very minimal amount of color fringing. Have a look at this local test photo. There's also virtually no green or purple color fringing as well. So if you want a lens that doesn't have much chromatic aberration, this TTArtisan 35mm f2 APO lens will be a really great choice for you. In terms of distortion, let's have a look at this brick wall test photo. As you can probably see, this TTArtisan lens has really minimal amount of distortion. even at the top and bottom edge of the photo, which usually is the place that you can see the distortion, there still really isn't much distortion at all. So this lens definitely has some pretty impressive distortion control. Lens flare is usually one of the biggest weakness for TTArtisan, so I was really quite worried that this lens may have poor performance in this area, as all my other image quality test results so far seems to be very decent. Luckily, I would say this 35mm lens flare performance is quite acceptable overall. Even when shooting on a really sunny day and directly into the sun, the lens flare control is not too bad. There isn't too much ghosting and contrast is quite good overall. When there is a bright light source at some particular angle, it would cause the contrast to drop a little bit, and sometimes there could be a bit of ring-shaped lens flare near the edge of the frame, but they don't happen very often, and when that happens, moving the camera angle a little bit could avoid that very easily. Now, one little issue we have is that if you are shooting with a Leica M camera and you are not using the LCD or attaching an EVF, then you will not really see the lens flare issue through the rangefinder window, which means if you want to avoid lens flare, it will be a little bit harder unless you check the photo after every shot and then you try to reshoot it if you see the lens flare issue and want to minimize it. My regular viewer will know 10-pounds Sunstars is my favorite Sunstar. So when I look at the spec sheet and saw this TTArtisan 35mm lens has a 10 aperture braid design, I was really excited, as it means I should be able to get my favorite Sunstars from this lens. And looking at my photos, this TTArtisan lens can indeed render some beautiful Sunstars. But you would need to stop down the lens quite a bit. You need to stop down the lens to f16, then you can have some beautiful 10-pounds Sunstars with long and sharp tails. I'm not too sure if many people would use a lens like this for videography, but let's have a look at the focus briefing performance of this lens anyway. So here is a test footage when I changed the focus from 1 meter to infinity, and there is quite a bit of focus briefing. Now, while it's definitely not the worst focus briefing that I've ever seen, it will still be pretty noticeable if you change the focus during video recording. I remember when I received this sample about a month ago, and when I took the lens out of the box, I was quite surprised by the size and weight of this lens. I was wondering why a 35mm f2 lens is so big and so heavy, especially for a M1 lens, which is usually a bit smaller than average lenses. But now, after using and testing it for about a month, I think I know why. The overall image quality of this lens is really good. I did most of my review using the latest Leica M11 with the super demanding 60 megapixel sensor, which means it would just shows you all the imperfection very clearly, but this TTArtisan lens has survived the test really well. The lens is very sharp with virtually no chromatic aberration, very minimal vignetting, and also very small amount of distortion as well. Even the Sunstars look very nice once you stop down the lens. Lens flare is usually TTArtisan's weakest area, and I think for this lens flare control is okay. It's acceptable under most shooting conditions, so I won't say it's terrible, but at the same time I do hope TTArtisan can continue to work on and improve the coding to minimize lens flare for their future lenses. So the biggest downside is really the size and weight of the lens, especially if you are a Leica M shooter and want a compact lens. Then this TTArtisan lens may be a little bit bigger than what you want. But if you don't really mind a bit of extra weight and size, then this TTArtisan 35mm f2 APO lens is a lens that delivers excellent image quality with a really affordable price.